My topic this evening, as you know, is Montessori, a philosophic perspective. Well, my perspective, to put it bluntly, is that Montessori is an outcast. Now, not an outcast among parents, not an outcast among children who have been fortunate enough to attend a Montessori school, but an outcast in the intellectual community. A recent survey I made of articles in education and philosophy journals revealed that only one article in the last 10 years was devoted to the intellectual foundations of the Montessori method. And this is not merely a recent trend. During my doctoral program in philosophy of education in the 1960s, Montessori was never mentioned, nor was it mentioned by any of my colleagues during 15 years of teaching in a philosophy of education program. And when I brought it up, it was generally met with some sort of blank stare of disinterest or a sarcastic remark about how Montessori belongs to the 19th century. Now, if indeed Montessori is an outcast, two questions might come to mind. Why is that the case? And what difference does it make? Now, given what it stands for, given what Montessori stands for, and what it does for children, you might not expect it to be an outcast. But it's an outcast precisely because of what it stands for. Montessori is ignored and attacked by intellectuals because of its underlying philosophy, because of its goals, its conception of human nature on which those goals are based. These attacks on Montessori reveal a clash of philosophies between the philosophy that underlies the method and the philosophy that is held by most intellectuals. This is not a healthy state of affairs for Montessorians, because it's philosophers, including those long dead, who ultimately determine the basis of a culture. This means that Montessori must be defended and advanced on philosophic grounds, and it must challenge the mainstream viewpoints. Now, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to say something about the importance of philosophy, because most people believe that philosophy, abstract philosophy that is, has little or nothing to do with the real world. They think that philosophy makes no difference at all, but my view is that it makes all the difference. That realization led me into philosophy as a career. It led to my involvement with Montessori schools, and it led to my current job as director of a philosophic institute. Now, when I say that philosophy makes a difference, it's important to understand what I do and what I don't mean by philosophy. Now, contrary to popular opinion, being philosophical does not mean escaping from reality into a world of abstract ideas. And contrary to the philosophic establishment, philosophy is not merely a challenging intellectual game. Now, this intellectual game approach to philosophy really dominates the universities and creates a major obstacle to the spread of Montessori. Now, to illustrate what I mean, let me relate to you a supposedly true story. This story took place at the first meeting of an introductory philosophy class. Now, before starting on the regular course material, the professor went through some housekeeping issues. And included among them was a very adamant point that there would be no smoking allowed in the classroom. Now, he cited various reasons. It was against university regulations, it was harmful to health, and violated the rights of your neighbors, etc. There's going to be no smoking allowed. So having got this out of the way, he begins the course material in a way that may be familiar to some of you. He holds up a pen, and he says, "What is this?" Well, some naive student raises his hand and says, "It's a pen." Well, you may know what's coming next. The professor is ready to pounce. "How do you know it's a pen?" he says. "Maybe it's a stick. Maybe it's an eyeliner. Maybe it's an illusion. Maybe it's hallucination. Maybe it doesn't exist at all. Whereupon he launched into a long tirade against those people who are so naive as to think they can know something for sure, that they can trust their senses. Meanwhile, the student comes into class, sits in the back, hasn't heard this anti-smoking tirade that came before the class, lights up a cigarette. Well, the professor's going on and on about how you can't trust your senses. He suddenly spots the smoker, interrupts his lecture, and angrily points to the offending cigarette. "What is that?" he says. The student holds up the cigarette and says, "Maybe it's a stick, maybe it's a pen, maybe it doesn't exist at all." Now, that's called being hoist by your own petard. And it's funny, and the joke, of course, was on the professor. Because to him, what he was saying and what he was going to be saying probably for the rest of the semester was, in effect, meaningless. It was a game. On the one hand, there's philosophy where you can't know anything. On the other hand, there's a reality where smoking can kill you. So there's a big, big gulf, philosophy and reality. Well, that attitude toward the place of philosophy and towards the efficacy of the human mind are both disastrous for Montessori, as we will see. Now, in fact, philosophy is not a pleasant diversion. It's not a diversion at all. It's a life and death matter. What's the actual role of philosophy? Well, very briefly, my view is that in order to understand why individuals and societies are the way they are, it's necessary to understand what philosophic beliefs they espouse and what philosophic beliefs they act on. Philosophy is at the root of an individual's personal character. For example, how honest he is, how productive, how purposeful, whether he works or prefers to be taken care of, whether he respects others or tries to manipulate them, whether he uses logic and seeks evidence for his beliefs, or follows his whims or the dogmatic commandments of other people. Now, on a wider level, on a social level, it's philosophy that determines a nation's social system, what rights people have, what the government can do, and why one country has political freedom and another country has slave labor camps and Berlin walls and massacres students protesting their lack of freedom. Now, because education involves both the individual and the social levels, it's tied to philosophy as especially close. In fact, education or schooling can be looked on as philosophy put into action. Now, from this standpoint, education is the systematic means of trying to develop a certain kind of individual. It represents a society's or a school's or a teacher's conception of what ought to be. Now, such is the philosophic nature of education. It involves some conception of human nature. What are children like? What are their needs? What does their survival and happiness require? Are they infinitely plastic? Can I make them into whatever I want? Education involves some conception of the human mind, the nature of thought, the nature of knowledge. Can I expect children to be able to reason? Should I encourage them to take what I say on faith? Can they be taught to think? And education involves ethics. What's a properly educated person? What's a good person? What goals should I have? How should I treat children? How should I expect them to treat others? Now, those philosophic issues are unavoidable. They're unavoidable for one's life in general, and they're unavoidable in educational practice. This is the case for all educational programs, but especially true for Montessori. Because unlike its competitors, and unlike much public perception, Montessori is not a conglomeration of clever techniques for teaching children to read and do arithmetic. It's an integrated system of education, and above all, an ideal. A reachable ideal, but an ideal. Montessori is an educational system based on a specific view of human nature, of the proper way to use one's mind to acquire knowledge, and it has a specific view of what ought to be, what goals are proper. Because Montessori represents a system, because it's the embodiment of a philosophy, it's particularly important to put Montessori in philosophic perspective, to see what makes it unique, to see why intellectuals ignore or attack it, and to see how it can be defended.